Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Welcome to this webinar discussion. My name is Katharine Otto. I am the Farmland Action Plan Coordinator at the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. I joined the team in the winter, and I am enjoying digging into implementing the Farmland Action Plan, which was released in December of last year. So today we're going to be focusing on land trusts and how they can get involved. Hopefully this will align well with what you're already doing, and it may also be expansion. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. So, today's goals. We're going to quickly do some introductions. We're going to do some context on kind of why farmland is so important in Massachusetts and why now, why we need to step up. And then talk a lot about how land trusts could get involved. And there really is a wide range in which that can happen. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps. Today's goal is really just to understand how MDAR and land trusts can work together and collaborate and coordinate to implement the plan. So getting started, as I mentioned, my name is Katharine Otto. I'm the Farmland Action Plan Coordinator. And you'll see every so often Dave Bialy, who is our Agricultural Lands Program Supervisor. He'll sometimes chime in the chat if there's a question that he can quickly answer. And Jared Kennedy, who's the Director for the Division of Agricultural Conservation and Technical Assistance. He will also be answering questions. What I would say is if you have a quick question or a comment, feel free to put them in the chat box. What we'll do is we'll have particular times for discussion, but if there is a quick question, it's good to put it in the chat box and we can address it where possible. If you don't understand, if there's an acronym I use that I forgot to define, definitely ask that question. We want to make sure everyone understands. We realize that not everyone is coming from the same level of understanding. So to get us started in the next few minutes, if you could just write into the chat box your name, your position, and your organization. And then we're going to do some polls to actually get a good idea of who is in the room. So Barbara, if you could pull up the first poll. So you have 4 questions on the screen. If you could quickly answer those, that would be great to give us an idea of where you're coming from. And if this could just be for people who are land trusts, I prefer not to have information about those who are not land trusts on this call. I love that you're here, but I want to understand the land trust in the room. Thank you. Barbara, how are we doing for answers? Are we doing pretty good?
39% participating.
Okay, we'll give it another minute.
42.
Cool. What I would say is we're going to have quite a few polls during this meeting to keep it moving because we have quite a few participants online. So what I'd say is stay close to your computer and be ready to answer the polls as they come up. It's really to help us to get a pulse on how things are going. How familiar are you with different things that we're working on or could work on? How interested are you? And things like that. And then we'll have actual discussion once we get through the polls. So Barbara, if you could bring up the results, that would be helpful. So it looks like we've got a good mix between the land trust being statewide, regional, a few towns, and 1 town. So we've almost kind of an even split. For where they work, also pretty even across the areas. Familiarity, we've got quite a few people who are very familiar and some who are somewhat. So that's helpful because that means that I don't have to go down to the absolute basics. But we're definitely going to start with that foundation so that we build up from the bottom. So we've got very familiar 79% and somewhat is 21%. And then does your land trust have a specific focus on farmland? That one's interesting. So we've got quite a variety here. We've got 46% with a notable focus, 31% with a little, 23% who don't yet, but might be interested. So that is really great to know. So thank you for those answers. Okay, so moving on. So some context. In the last few years, you've probably heard a lot about several different plans coming out of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the plans which are written on the screen, and they all build on each other. So what we're talking about here is not really a lot of different plans. These are plans that build together towards an overall common vision, one big initiative. So what are they trying to do with land? They're looking to protect more land and faster. They're looking to manage those lands, restore the lands, and steward them well. And so that's a lot of different things. And one thing to think about with those plans is they sometimes have different lenses and different concentrations. So we're looking at everything from climate resilience, environmental justice, economy, urban areas, health, food, and water. And obviously each one has specialties. But really, this is not about adding extra work. It's about being part of this cohesive vision and initiative to do more with the lands that we have. So one of the first things to highlight is what is a farm and what is farmland? There is a lot of difference across the state in terms of what people value from the farms and the farmland. People are seeing it about preserving their rural heritage, contributing to their local economy. It's part of a cultural element. It's also about family businesses and soil health and climate change. So what I'd say is if there's something on here that you don't see that is what you value, and what you see as a farm, let me know and I'll add to this, because definitely there is diversity on what we mean by that. Just so you know, we will be sharing a copy of the slide deck afterwards, so there's no need to write your hand off to keep up or take screen shares all the time. So where is farming at today in Massachusetts? We've got about 7,000 farms contributing about 9% of the land area in Massachusetts. So that's quite a lot of the land area. It also has a large impact on our economy and employs a good number of people across the state. But why is the Farmland Action Plan important today? The biggest thing is we are losing land fast. We're not just losing it to development, we are losing it to other land uses as well. And we have lost about the area, 2 times the area of Martha's Vineyard in the last 25 years. That is a lot of acreage of farmland to be lost. Now, why is this important? Usually when farmland is lost to another use, it is really hard to bring it back to agriculture. And so it rarely does come back to agriculture. So we are losing a resource that can come back. So farms under threat, looking forward to the future. The American Farmland Trust did a great study, which I recommend checking out, Farms Under Threat, and projected out for the next 25 years. And they're looking at, even if we make all the best changes in the world and make a bunch of really good changes to legislation and changes to our practices and encourage our businesses, we could still lose as many as 50,000 acres of farmland in Massachusetts alone. If we don't make changes, we could lose as much as 89,000 acres. So that is a lot that we could lose if we don't pay attention and step up to help. So as you may be aware, and you may best be aware of part of this slide, there is a crisis for agriculture right now. We are looking at several different areas which are all coming together into almost the perfect storm. So in the land and climate area, land prices have risen significantly, about a 50% increase in prices per acre over the last 5 years. So that is a very steep increase in the price of land. And that's really important because if you see in the people and systems, we have an aging population. 40% of our producers, so the people who are the primary decision makers on a farm, are over the age of 65. And most of them do not have a plan for where their farm will go after they retire and step away. So if you combine the two, that makes a big problem. We also are losing land to competing land uses, as I mentioned. Climate change is causing a bunch of havoc all over the place. And we also have problems with economics. In Massachusetts, for every 95 cents that are earned, $1 is being spent on production. So that is a negative relationship to how much you're spending on the farm. And that is not good for the long-term sustainability. And then there are also other issues, including historic and current inequities in farming and access to farmland. So what's in the plan? The plan was state funded and state coordinated and was created mostly between 2022 and 2023 and was released in December of last year. It is a long-range strategic initiative going out to 2050. That's a long way out, but let's get started. And what I'd say is go to the project website and you can actually download the full plan. So who will implement the plan? I think that's a really important question because this is not actually just a plan for MDAR. This is also a plan for other state agencies. It has items related to legislative changes and also a lot of work from our external partners. We all come together with different expertise, with different focuses, with different things that capture our attention and that we can bring to the table. So really this is all in, like coming together to work together to address farmland in Massachusetts. And in some cases, I think something to mention, in some cases, traditionally, we've had good relationships and we've been working together already. There are many entities and partners who are existing partners. But in some cases, we need to develop those relationships, and we'll be working on those in the coming weeks and months and years, because we do need to do a lot of different work in a lot of different areas. So what are the goals of the plan? I think that's really the thing that pulls everything together. We have 3 main goals, and those goals overlap very much. Sometimes we're like, oh, does it really belong in protection? And that's why. So the biggest one, so one of them is protection. So accelerating the permanent protection and stewardship of farmland. Because as I mentioned, once farmland is converted to other uses, it generally will not return to agriculture. Now, related to this is access to farmland. Enabling farmland accessibility requires equitable, affordable, and identifiable opportunities and options. So as the one generation is aging out and the new farmers are coming in, how do we enable those connections? How do we give them good resources? How do we make it financially viable? There are lots of different things to work through in that area. And then the last element of this, no less important, is supporting and enhancing the viabilities of farms and farmland. The best way to protect a farm is for it to be viable. If your farm is doing well, why would you sell it? Why would there be problems? And so ensuring that we have successful farms is one of the best ways to protect the farmland and keep it in farming. So how this works is we have an implementation matrix. We took the plan is finalized. It was released in December of last year. And then we have an implementation matrix, which takes that plan and then starts to move it into implementation. We have 3 goals plus 1 to do with things which are overarching, like public education. We have 13 strategies. And then we have the parts which we're really working on, and we'll talk a lot about today. We've got the actions, we've got 68 actions and counting. And then we've got the tasks, and this is 338. I think it started at 330 when I was starting, and I've been talking with people, and we've added and refined. And so this is how this works. We're talking about the goals, those top 3. Then the strategies that says, what are we trying to accomplish on that big level? The actions then say, what do we want to do? And then tasks give us like the breakdown of how we want to do it. So those strategies, here we have them on the slides, those 13. And I've highlighted 2 which are of particular interest for land trusts. One is the permanent protection of farmland through purchases of agricultural restrictions. I think we'll spend quite a bit of time on that today. And the other one is supporting farm transfer and succession in ways that enhance access to farmland. But as you can see from the slide, we really do cover a wide range of strategies to address those 3 major goals. So to give you an idea of what that really means in reality as we start to implement, I've got some examples here. So in our protected stewardship goal, we've got 2 major things which have happened or in the process of happening, more accurately. So one thing that's being worked on is the APR program, the Agricultural Purchase Restrictions. Protection restrictions. They are right now looking at modifying how farms are evaluated for protection. That is going through review. And so that is in progress. There's also been a lot of work by AFT and NRCS to encourage municipalities to adopt farmlands of local importance, which it helps to make more lands available, eligible for federal funding for protection. In the access area, we've been doing a lot of work with adjusting how to prioritize use of public lands, which are being stewarded by MDAR. And we have been looking at how to include more historically underserved farmers on those lands. In this context, historically underserved farmers, per the USDA definition, is talking about beginning farmers, BIPOC, veterans, and limited resource. And then, then we come to viability. One of the a good initiative that's just come out of MDAR is the new Farm Pass program, which is looking at how to pass on your farm to the next generation and help with that planning. There are lots of entities that help with transfer planning and succession planning, and MDAR is adding to that mix to fill in a gap that was existing. And then another method of implementation in the more general area, one big thing was actually hiring my position so that we could spend time on focusing on the Farmland Action Plan alongside all of our other priorities. And also I've been refining the implementation matrix with the input from many partners. And today, your input today will also help with that refining of the implementation matrix, because you all bring something good to the table. So how could land trusts get involved? What I'd say is, for this next little section, keep your fingers on the buzzer, as they say in English game shows, because we're going to do quite a few polls. The polls is how we get a pulse on what you're thinking. What I'm going to do is give an overview of actions and tasks within the plan, and then a polls to assess like how interested you are in that particular activity. And then once we've gone through a few of them together, we'll do a discussion by a particular goal. So the first one.
Katharine, I don't know if you saw the chat question about whether you just want land trust to respond, or do you want all folks to respond?
For those polls, if it could just be land trust, that would be helpful. So thank you. But when it comes to the discussion, everyone can chime in. So thanks. So first off, we're going to focus on protection, accelerating the permanent protection and stewardship of farmland. So we've got those 4 primary strategies, which are written across the top, and I'm just going to be quiet for like half a minute so you can just skim through these bullet points. These bullet points are summarizing all of the actions that come into there, and you'll see there is a very broad range of actions. And what I would say is, if you see something in here that you're like, we didn't discuss it today, feel free to reach out or look at the plan and get more information about those topics. What I would say is land trusts have a very diverse range of things that you can do and where you have expertise, which means we are going to cover a lot in the next hour and a half, or hour and 10 minutes more accurately. So the first area was talking about purchasing agricultural restrictions. So we're talking about the purchase of easements and fee simple ownership and other mechanisms to permanently protect land. And we're also talking about leveraging the maximum amount of federal funding available. So we're showing the need, and we actually have those resources available. Because obviously the more federal funds we use, the less state funds and local funds we need to find to protect that land. So if Barbara, if you can bring up that poll, that would be great. And this is for land trusts, if that's okay. So.
And just noting that there are 3 questions, so page down to see all 3 questions in this poll.
Okay, how are we doing for responses, Barbara?
15%.
Okay.
It's going up quickly.
Sounds good. Is it slowing down now?
We're kind of stuck at 45%, so I'll end the poll.
Sounds good. Thank you. So looking at results, thank you. So this is interesting. How comfortable are you with protection options? 59% say I know quite a bit. 35% I know a little. 6% say I don't know much. Well, we're going to cover some today, but we'll cover more in the future. Which protection option methods do you prefer? And this was a multiple choice. So conservation restrictions are the most popular method here at 69%. We've also got 50% with private APRs, 38% with APRs, 25% with fee simple, and 6% with limited term covenant. And then how comfortable would you be to share different protection options with others? So for example, some entities like to do webinars. I know Buy Locals and AFT and other groups have been doing education, and I'm pretty sure Land Trust have too. 60% say they would be comfortable to share those options now. 33% would like a little bit more training, and 7% are not comfortable. So that's great. That's good to know. So let's keep going. So awareness of protection options. Increasing awareness of permanent protection options is a big part of the plan, because how do we choose what are the right options to the table? Sometimes a CR will be the best option on the table, given what you're working with the land over, what the land is giving, and a variety of other factors. Sometimes you're looking at an APR, sometimes you're looking at private APR, all of these other options we discussed. We're also looking at how to build capacity of state agencies, land trusts, municipalities, and other entities to protect land. We all know we live in the real world, and the real world does not have enough resources to do everything we want. There's a big wish list, and so one of the things we're looking at is how do we build capacity? And then the last part of this is also about increasing the number of applications for protection. There are times when we have more money available than what we have applications to do. So let's see if we can have more applications over time. So Barbara, if you could bring up the poll, that'd be great.
What was this called? Because this looks like a different title than what was in your original one.
I have no idea. It might have been combined as, I can hear what was on it. That actually seems like the poll we just did. Okay, let's go. We answered those questions, so that's good. So let's move on to the next area. So this area I definitely see could be something that you don't do much of now, but I would love to see if you would explore it. Zoning reform and smart growth. We have a lot of municipalities. We've got that 351, I believe. That's a lot of municipalities who hold a lot of land and have the ability to inform how development occurs in their town. Different policies and ways they enact them can make big differences. We'll be working in the coming years with municipalities more, and we'd love to work with regional planning agencies and land trusts as well to forge those relationships with municipalities. How can we move forward with zoning reform and smart growth that supports agriculture and doesn't put it as a disadvantage and isn't an afterthought, because that can really make a big change. So I'd love to know, Barbara, if you could bring up the poll. I know this is a new area, so I'm very curious to see what you think about this one. Barbara, let me know when you've got a good number.
Yep, we're still moving actively up.
Sounds good. Okay, ooh, okay, this is really good to know. This really helps me to prioritize what we pay attention to. We've got 44% saying, I'm not sure our land trust would want to do that. That's fine. There's more than enough things to get done. But it is good to know that we've got 22% in there who say, I do them a little, but a bit interested to put to spend more time on them. So that's interesting. And you've also got that 11% if I don't do them, but would be interested. And that 11% who said I already do it. So that gives me a good reason to say, hey, reach out when we start moving more on zoning reform and smart growth discussions to say, hey, land trust, would you like to get involved? There's no commitment from what you talked about today, but it's good for us to get a pulse to know that it's about half and half who might want to get involved and who might not. So the next area is CPA. So identifying opportunities to increase CPA funding and its application to farmland protection, as well as on and off farm housing. Barbara, if you could bring up the poll on this one. It's another area where you may not be involved right now, but you might be interested. So I'm very curious.
Okay.
Cool. Oh, this is interesting. So there seems like there's a little bit more interest in CPA because we're looking at only 25% saying that they're not sure they would be interested. you've got that combination of different levels of interest for the rest. So that's really helpful. So thank you for that. Okay, next slide. Statewide prioritization. So obviously, everyone in this room knows about various different prioritization methods, particularly to do with conserving land. But one thing we don't have in Massachusetts right now is protection and prioritization for protecting farmland. And so one of the items that was written into the plan is, how do we do that? And so I would love to know if you might be interested in getting involved, and also knowing if you already do it. And as I mentioned, with each of these task areas, what we're doing is giving that quick overview today. With each of these, if we start moving on particular areas, we'll send out a general call and say, hey, would you like to get involved? Because there are a wide variety of partners, land trusts, and many others who might have an interest and want to be sitting at the table to get involved. Okay. 53% said they would be interested, and 33% said they might be interested. So I'm hearing it very loud and clear. Land trusts are interested in this. I can imagine very interested to see the results, as well as to shape what those results could look like. Then the last part of protection, we're looking at, there are various other actions in here. One is looking at diversifying funding sources. I had a conversation with one of the partners who I know is on this call, who said, well, this is the bread and butter of what land trusts do. You have a really diverse amount of funding sources to make things work, to keep the lights on. And so that's one area. Another area is about looking at potentially having installment purchases, allowing for installment purchases of APRs. So instead of getting that one windfall that comes 1 year that says that here's all the money you get, instead of spreading it out over several years to reduce the tax impact. So that's another thing that we're curious about people's interest in getting involved with. Another thing is creating watch lists of important farmland that is not yet protected. And I know that at least one land trust does this in various ways, including a TerraCore member, I think, to support it. But I'm interested if other land trusts have this on the radar to potentially do. And then a new task potentially being considered is about increasing involvement of land trusts and other entities in the NRCS State Technical Committee and the Easements Subcommittee. It's not written as a task, but I know that several partners have mentioned the importance of having land trusts actively involved in those groups going forwards. So it's being considered as a new task. So Barbara, if you could bring up the poll, that would be great.
Again, there are 3 questions in this poll.
Yep,
Please
so make
answer
sure
them
you scroll
all.
down.
Do people not see it because no one's responding?
I see
Okay,
it,
here we
a
go.
lot of words.
Yeah.
And I wrote it, sorry for all the words. I just saw that Jamie shared registration for the next easement subcommittee meeting, which is coming up. Thank you, Jamie. And there's lots of other links. Sorry, I've not been paying attention to the chat. Okay, thank you for these results. Okay, this is really interesting. So for installment or annuitized purchases of APRs, 63% don't do them but would be interested, and 31% said they might. So that is definitely saying that there's firm kind of, okay, let's explore this further. What does this mean? So that's really good to know. Would you be interested to create watch lists of important farmland? Oh, now this is even more interesting. So we've got 27% of the people, land trusts on here already do it. 33% say they do it a little, but we would be interested to do more. 27% I don't do them, but would be interested, and 13% might be interested. One of the reasons I'm speaking these out loud is because the recording will not have these results in the same way. So, but I think it's also helpful to know we're coming. And then about awareness of the NRCS State Technical Committee. Many people are interested to learn more, and some are already involved. So that's really great to know. And Jamie can definitely help you get connected in there. So one of the things I just want us to think about, and we'll move pretty fast through this slide, but I'd love for you to put information into the chat box. We know there are barriers. When I'm asking about whether you're interested, you're facing barriers every day. You're looking at, does it fit the mission or vision of my organization? Do I have enough staff capacity? Do I have the hours in the day? Do I have the knowledge or skills? Is this really a regional need, or is this something that doesn't apply to me? So what I would say is, if there are any other barriers, or maybe a refinement on how I've just expressed them, of what impacts how you make a decision of what you get involved in, if you could just put them in the chat, that would be really helpful for us to just be aware of what influences your decision making, and what influences how much you can lean in and step up versus not. So what I'd say is, with that, feel free to put that in the chat box at any point, and we'll grab those all at the end. So now we've got to the actual discussion part. So we're doing well on time, which is really great. Thank you for keeping your fingers on the buzzers. That enable us to move really nice and fast. So now we'll have about 10 minutes to discuss those protection tasks. So we just went through them. On this slide is that very quick summary to summarize what we were talking about. What I would say is ask any questions or have any questions or comments. Keep your comments brief if possible, because we've got quite a few people on the call and we have about 10 minutes for this particular item. Feel free, though, to use the reactions button, the one which has the little heart on the bottom near hand raise, because if you agree with it, say yes or do a thumbs up, because that shows that you agree, and that's really helpful to know, and we know that more people agree with what with what someone's saying. So we'll have the same kind of discussion time for each of the goals. So we'll start, though, to just focusing on protection tasks. So any questions or comments related to what we've chatted about so far?
Hi, can you hear?
Go ahead.
Yes.
All right, this is Pamela Paquin from Southbridge. And I also sit on the planning board here in town, and we have 22% prime farmland and soil of statewide significance, but a very low financial capacity or interest in protecting farmland currently in the municipality, for example. We are part of the umbrella of Opacum Land Trust. So one of the things that I've been hoping to see is something similar to the solar mandate, that there is a farmland mandate. And one of the ways that that might be achieved, for example, is a minimal amount of subdividing of parcels that have, say, more than 50% prime farmland soils or soils of statewide significance as a mechanism or a tool for municipalities to deploy. Because there is an increasing interest in protecting our farmland, but because they're privately owned, the means through which we can do that are only privately held by the landowner themselves.
Thank you for that idea. And I don't think it's currently reflected in the plan, but I can definitely, we can look at how it might fit in.
Yeah, the zoning area, there's something there, but there's certainly a working between the state and municipal levels, giving us a tool to protect the soils that are registered prime farmland would be very helpful from a municipal level, because there is increasing interest and lack of capacity legally.
Yeah, thank you. And I think one thing that comes along with mandates is it's actually even better to do education. So how do we win people over and share information? And the protection section doesn't have as much on education, because in what we've shown today, there is a lot about educating the public and local officials. So it is reflected in other parts of the plan.
Well, the officials, being an official myself, there's nothing the officials can do if a private landowner decides to sell. And we are currently getting hit from a massive wave of development to the point where they're writing about our town in newspapers as a place where you can get a good return on investment. So we need a tool whereby, much like with the solar mandate, we couldn't refuse development of solar arrays because the state had a solar mandate. They were allowed to do it. And so if we want to protect prime farmland soils, we need something similarly that is further on than a municipal bylaw.
Thank you for the concern, and I'll make sure it's recorded and see what we can do, see if it can get integrated. Anything else? Any other perspectives on things that land trusts could get involved with?
Mike McCallum, this is an odd one. We've had a lot of, I would say, misuse of the agricultural definition up here. Farming is protected as something you can't regulate as thoroughly as housing and so on. And so every clever person who thinks they're clever as a developer claims they're a farm. And so we've had a compost operation that was actually an illegal landfill. And we've had, hemp growers. I put the hemp in quotes. And we've had a dog breeding operation that's actually a farm, because under Mass state law, breeding dogs are considered livestock under a court definition. So anybody who's got 5 acres of lawn of land can do whatever sort of a dog operation they want, and none of that helps farmland. So it would be good if there was a way that there was a tight definition of what is farmland and what is farming, because it's getting abused in our town.
Thank you for those examples. I don't know if Jared wants to speak up, but I know that there is a section in the plan that talks about what is the definition of agriculture and changing those definitions potentially, or exploring that. So, but it's good to know those examples.
Sure. Just actually back to Pamela's question regarding tools. The no net loss of farmland is something that the state has promoted through both the Resilient Lands Initiative, the Climate Energy Plan, to seek legislation towards that end. And while it's not directly reflected in the Farmland Action Plan, the Farmland Action Plan does align itself with the goals of the Resilient Lands Initiative and the Clean Energy and Climate Plan. So is no net loss of farmland, is that kind of where you're going, Pamela, with your comments?
We are actively losing farmlands to subdivisions currently again. And the challenge inside our municipality is that there is no way to build a bylaw to prevent private landowners from developing their land. They have the right, whereas when we were confronted with the solar mandate as a planning board, we were not allowed to say no unless it was a threat to human health and safety. So if there was a farmland mandate, we would, as a board, be empowered to say no to development on prime farmland soils. So we need that mechanism, that tool, because on a municipal level, we are not allowed to say no currently.
Thanks. And Mike, which town are you in? Mike McCallum.
So I'm in Ashby, Massachusetts, up on it didn't actually fit in one of your areas in the, what area are you in? Because we're actually in Middlesex County, but we're in the furthest northern western tip of it. So we're north of Worcester County.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, there are 2 definitions for agriculture. There's Chapter 128(1)A, which is very broad. And then there's 61A. 61A is the statute that we use typically for our land protection efforts. But certainly the definition of agriculture under 128(1)A is quite a broad definition. So I would agree.
Okay,
Well,
sorry, go ahead, Mike.
No, it would be helpful. You wind up in court sometimes, and there's absolutely nothing you can do.
Yeah, I mean, we're frequently asked, do we license farms? Is there a farm registration process? And there's not. And the department's response is to refer to the statute and whether or not the actual activity fits within the statute as it is defined.
So I see that Katharine has her hand up, but I would like to move on if we can. So Katharine, if you could hold your question, we're going to have time to come back, if that's all right, because I want to make sure we get to the other areas. So what we're going to do is do the similar discussion points and others, and then we'll come back to as much as we have time. But Katharine, if you want to, you can also put it in the chat box, so if we can respond to it, or we'll definitely have it. So thank you. So moving on, we're now going to talk more about access to farmland. So we're going to look at making more land available for agriculture, supporting farm transfer and succession, increasing access for BIPOC and historically underserved farmers, and then supporting service provider networks to meet the needs of all farmers. I'm just going to be quiet for half a minute so you can read through some examples of what that might involve. And you will see again, there is a wide diversity of how people can get involved. Okay, so moving on. The first area is talking about publicly held land. So one thing that we would love to do, the plan outlines, is about assessing all existing publicly held land for its suitability for agriculture and how to make more of it available. So right now, the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources, MDAR, we have care and control of several lands to help license those out to farmers who might want to get involved. But this task is looking at, are there other publicly held lands that we could bring into agriculture and make more available? And so this particular item is looking about bringing in various different entities to list that, including municipal lands. So Barbara, if you could bring up the poll, that'd be useful. The publicly held lands could be municipally held or state held. I think those are the main two categories. They may be federal, but I'm guessing that's a very small percentage which could be suitable for that. So this one, this is really useful to know. So 38%, I would not sure our land trust would be interested, but then we've got a good combination of 31% don't do this, but would be interested to, and 25% might. And a few are doing it a little, so we can learn from that. That'd be great. So next slide. So farm and farmland transfer, as I mentioned, as we're passing that to the next generation, we've got 40% of our producers over the age of 65, many without a plan of where their farmland and their farm goes next. How we help to transfer that to the next generation is super important. So we would love assistance from many different partners on how we do that. What we realize is that land trusts, along with many other service providers across the state, have those personal relationships that can really help with farmland transfer, making the connections and also actually protecting them. So for example, you could be part of the transfer and they could protect the land in the process of the transfer. And so there are many other ways that land trusts could get involved. So I'm really curious to find out how interested people are in getting involved in these areas. I see Jamie put in Land for Good, and there are many other organizations who are helpful. So 36% already doing this. This is great. 29% do it low, but would love to do more. And then we've got a good mix of the others, but that's really good to know that people are already leaning in and saying, this is important and I want to get more involved. And so this is definitely seems like a good priority area for land trusts. Thank you for that. So working with historically underserved farmers, just to remind you of that definition, it includes BIPOC farmers, it includes beginning farmers, those who have been working on a farm for less than 10 years. It includes veterans, and it also includes those of limited resources. So that's fiscal resources. So in this area, we're very interested about how involved land trusts would like to get in terms of helping historically underserved farmers to access land and to do applications. And we're also interested at about how involved they would like to be at looking at alternative methods for protection of land and for accessing land, land tenure options, things like ground leases and other alternatives. So this area is definitely one where more work needs to be done. So, Barbara, if you can bring up the poll, thank you. There are 3 questions in here, so you'll need to scroll down. And when it comes to novel land tenure models, I know some land trusts are doing some already, have been involved, and there's many other options to consider. So just let us know if you might be interested. There definitely needs to be more exploration of those options.
I think, Catherine, I'm not sure. I think Vanessa's asking a question in the chat, maybe related to the poll.
Applications. Yeah.
She's not understanding what applications we're referring to.
So this is applying for applications for using public lands. So for example, if a farmer would like to use municipal lands or state lands for their production, that's what this is talking about in this particular case. There is another question to do with more general grant applications later on. So this is just focusing on access to farmland. Okay. So in terms of applications related to access to land, 21% already do, 43% do it a little, but will be interested to do more, and some are not sure. We've then, for assessing needs and publicizing available farmland, this is really interesting because 53% do it a little bit, will be interested to do more. There are obviously several resources out there, but sounds like a good opportunity to get together and learn from each other and see what we can do. And then we've got the exploring novel land tenure options. 60% very interested, 33% maybe. So this one also seems like a firm we would like to get involved as that moves forward. So thank you. Then other access tasks. One of the ones that we're looking at, which was suggested, is about compiling a database and map of privately held CRs that allow agriculture. So we obviously have some databases that look at where is the agricultural land, but understanding which CRs, conservation restrictions, allow agriculture is something that is important to some. We also have talking about building capacity of business technical assistance providers, including for transfer planning. And then the last one, I'll give a little bit more context about this. We obviously see this, as much as we've got the shift of all the farmers aging out, we've also got a shift of a lot of the service providers, whether they're attorneys, realtors, financial institutions, and other things like that. And we know that as land trusts, that a lot of you have those good relationships with the providers in your area and can be part of that the training of the next generation who comes in. You work with agricultural land, which has specificities. It's different from other conservation types and definitely different from housing and other attitudes. So we know you can be part of that equation of how you can bring up and raise the next generation of service providers and train them up. So that's how we're interested. So Barbara, if you could bring up the poll. Vanessa, I see your comment. And for some of this, we're going to have to think outside the box. We don't necessarily have those relationships, so we have to start together. We have to work on it and use the connections we have and start. So this is going to be really interesting. And if anyone's ever worked in data, I have to say, when it comes to a list or a map, you know it's hard. So, yep, this does not surprise me. 73% say that I would have to do. I know where the privately held CRs are that allow ag. but I would need to do some digging. Data is always fun, but that's really good to know that you do have an idea, because that's a really good starting point. Because sometimes you literally have to go down to the town office and get everything, which is even less helpful. And then improve and developing the capacity of service providers. This is interesting. So there's a little bit more mix. So we've got kind of 40% roughly who would be interested to do it. But there are some who would be interested to do more. And there's 33% who they said they wouldn't. So that's a good mix. And it's good to know that we have some solid interest. So pretty sure. Yep. Thinking about those access tasks. We're now going to take 10 minutes to just talk about access, the task that we've just had. Questions, comments. How could your land trust get involved? Are there challenges? What are you really interested in, or have a great example? Okay, we have a hand up from Kathy. Go ahead.
Hi,
Hey.
I will. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
One of the elements that I have heard for many, many years that makes it a challenge for a lot of farmers to use state or municipally owned land, particularly state-owned land, is that it has to, after 5 years or whatever the term is, it has to go back out to bid. So that for a farmer, if they need to invest in putting fencing in for pasture or for something else, they need a longer term lease and more security that it's not just gonna, they're not just gonna lose that. So as we're looking at trying to enhance the amount of public land that is available, being able to look at ways to extend that, you know, those licenses, the leases, whatever they are, so that there's potential for maybe rollover without having to go out to bid, but something that gives the security to the farmer to use it, or alternatively, needing to have money for the state to put in the improvements, so that that cash outlay isn't on the farmer.
All good points. I think those elements are reflected in other areas of the plan, so we're just not listed today. But I don't know, Jared, if you wanted to chime in.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Kathy. So yes, by statute, licenses are a 5-year term. They can be extended for another 5 years. So typically, we don't go out to bid for state land that's licensed out to farmers for 10 years, unless something, you know, the farmer decides that they don't want to, you know, license the land out after 5 years. So typically they have a 10-year term. Historically, the 10-year terms have been also continued. So we have some farmers that have been licensing out state land for 20 or 30 years. We do also invest in improvements on our land, whether it's access or water access. So we are certainly conscious of the need to do that. NRCS also has funded high tunnels on one of our properties in Lakeville. So we do, and also our mega grant program has also funded farmers on our Lakeville property as well.
Any other access related questions or comments? What I would say, Kathy, I know that you and I have actually gone through the matrix, and there's a lot more that kind of you're involved with and interested in. What I would say is, after today's call, go through the plan and see if there are other areas you're like, my land trust would love to get involved. and let me know, because it's not committing you to get involved, but it keeps it on my radar that land trusts are a particular entity that would like to get involved in this X many different tasks. We've got, as I mentioned, 330 tasks within the plan. I'm bringing to you today about 50 of them, which have been slightly pre-vetted with the help of Kathy and Rob and Mark Walmsley. But there are more, so definitely reach out to me if there are other areas, because I want to make sure I invite the right people to the table, to the conversations, who can help to get involved, to refine the questions, and to implement. So,
You know, it might be useful. So it's like some of the information that Jared just articulated about farmers who have had those, you know, those leases for 30 years, 40 years, those kinds of things, to be able to provide examples that are easily accessible by farmers, or where land trusts can send farmers to see what those examples are, to help offset what the belief is out there, because we still hear it all the time.
yeah.
Whether that's on this or anything else, just, you know, providing examples so that you can direct landowners and farmers to see those kinds of things.
Thank you. Okay, I'm hearing silence. That's not a bad thing. It means we'll be able to come back to that question or comment from protection later on. So we're going to move on. We're going to talk about viability of farms and farmland. So this is talking about laws, regulations, programs, and investments that support farm viability, growing resilience and sustainability practices on farms, and also about increasing the use of services, programs, and other resources by farmers. I'm going to be quiet for just 30 seconds so you can read the kinds of activities, the actions that you can get involved in this area. And I know there might be a few on this call who are particularly interested in urban agriculture. What I'd say is today we're not going to talk so much about it, but I do have it on my radar that to have discussions with partners interested in urban agriculture in the coming months. So let me know if you're particularly interested to get looped into a conversation specifically focusing on urban ag, which is a whole realm of its own. Okay, so moving on. So in this area, so when we're talking about viability, one action is talking about developing a communication plan to promote public and private resources available to farmers. We all know that we sometimes need those standard resources to help educate people when we're going out there. Obviously, that personal conversation makes so much of a difference to make it that reality, but sometimes you need that cheat sheet to remind you of all the 5 points that you need to mention, not just the 4 that you remembered today. So that's what this is talking about, making sure we have some good resources to build on. So Barbara, if you could bring up the poll, that would be great. And some of you may not be interested in developing the outreach materials just to use them, and that is okay. Whereas others are like, I have the expertise, I want to shape what it becomes, and that's what I want to know. So I won't be offended if you're not interested in making it or developing it. Okay. 36% may definitely, 9% maybe, and 55% not sure. They would want to. That's fine. That's good to know. That 36% and 9% will definitely work with you guys. Educating farm sellers and farm buyers. 18% say they already do, and 55% say they do it a little, but would be interested in more. So that's really good to know as we do more on farm transfer and viability. Okay. Next. So in the last parts of the viability slides, as I mentioned, the kind of more general is helping farmers to do grant applications, just for any different programs that come out, MDAR, federal programs, private programs, just assisting them to write grant applications that can get them the funding they need to stay viable. And another area in here is also talking about providing incentives for communities to enact farm-friendly zoning and tax policies. I'm very curious to find out, particularly the grants one. And a little bit of context for the grant applications. MDAR has actually been collating a list of entities who are willing to help farmers to write grant applications. At MDAR, we try and create the simplest application possible, getting what we need to do our job, but not asking it in a complicated way. But we realize that sitting down and writing out a grant application is not everyone's specialty. So help is sometimes needed. But at MDAR, we are collating a list of those who are willing to help. We realize others may be willing to help as well. Sometimes, so yeah. Interesting. Okay, so 27% said they're not interested, but the rest are interested to some extent. It's interesting that that's 36%. I do this a little, but would be interested to do more with the grant applications. So that's definitely showing an interest. When it comes down to encouraging farm-friendly zoning and tax policies, we've also got that 36% who would do it a little, but will be interested to do more. And we've also got 36% who are not sure they want to do it, and then a little in between. Great. So the viability section is a lot shorter for our discussion today because we know that land trusts tend to specialize more in protection. But what we say is that we have about 10 minutes if there are any questions related to viability. And it could also be related to something that you didn't see that I didn't share in more detail. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep moving. And if you have a question of viability, we'll come back to it. We can definitely scroll back to the slide. It's fine. And I'm not offended. It's good that we know that that's where we don't have questions right now. So supporting all goals. As I mentioned, those 3 goals: protection, access, and viability. But then we have some actions that kind of support all of those goals almost equally. So one of the ones is hiring my position as Farmland Action Plan Coordinator. We also have a bunch of tasks which are under implementing the Farmland Action Plan. And some of those involve historically underserved farmers, mapping and tracking land, and things like that. We also have building support for agriculture and farmland protection. So in this area, I'm actually all fit onto one slide for once, which is kind of useful. Barbara, if you could bring up the poll, that would be great. I am very curious to know how regularly people are updating the protected and recreational open space GIS layer. The reason why I ask this is because when it comes to mapping and tracking farmland, that would probably be the first step. And then there's many other steps to track what it takes to track all of the other elements which are called for within the plan. And at this point, as the poll kind of comes to a close when it's ready, which it is, which is great, at least annually, that's great to know. 27% occasionally, that's probably good because you're probably just not protecting as many as often. But update as often as you can, that would be great. And 36% not right now. So that would be good to encourage it more. So with this section, all goals, and definitely if you want to bring up viability, because we didn't have a discussion really on that. Do you have any questions or comments related to the items in this area? And I also, if we do seem to have time, so I'm wondering if anyone would like to speak up on how they're getting involved with EJ and equity, because that's kind of an emerging field, and how we engage in farming and farmland is important, and it's going to take time to shape what that becomes. So.
I'd be happy to make a comment on that from the perspective that I'm seeing happening here in Southbridge, because we've run a few inclusion programs that haven't lifted off the ground. it seems we have very vibrant food pantries. We have, I think the average income in this town is 35,000, and 64% of our kids are food insecure at their homes. So we're on the federal food program for our schools, just to put it into context. So over the last 20 years or so, we've had these food pantries, and they are run by volunteers and local churches, and those are doing exceptionally well. We have something called the Bridge Fridge, which is donations, and the farmers contribute to that. But when we opened up space in town on municipal land for farming, a couple people kind of did something here and there, but the biggest challenge actually was access to water. There was no water to work the land, so the infrastructure wasn't there. And as soon as the weather kind of got dry, everything, all their efforts dried up, and that was it. So that kind of that effort to empower people to actually work the land was lacking the infrastructure. We have a wonderful economic development officer now, who I'm sure could help us find out how to afford to put in infrastructure like that. But at this point, it's a very low item on the agenda for prioritization. As an example, so we've been wanting to get, we have a $60,000 unit to grow vegetables sitting at our high school not being used. That was donated to our school system, and it's not even being used. And yet so many of these children are going hungry day to day at home. So that's kind of just an example of how in poor municipalities we have resources, but the connection through infrastructure and people to lead just isn't there. And those of us who work are so overstretched as it is. We can't pick up all the pieces.
Thank you. That's all good to know. And we are definitely aware that municipalities and public and state entities having the capacity to do the work is a big challenge. So. Are there any land trusts? I think there are a few on the call who have been doing specific work with tribal entities and others. I don't know if they'd be willing to share how they've been getting involved in the equity and EJ spaces. I think it would be helpful to others on the call. Okay.
Talk a little bit about the project that BNRC did with the Stockbridge Muncie tribe, if that's helpful.
That would be great. Thank you. Yes, Amy.
Sure. So essentially, BNRC got word of acreage on Monument Mountain in the Berkshires, which is the homeland and an important place for the Stockbridge Muncie tribe, who were forcibly removed and now are in, I think, Wisconsin. But they still have a presence in the Berkshires. And so we heard about that land coming up for sale. And one of our conservation staff has been cultivating relationships with some of the tribe members. And we worked with them to submit a municipal vulnerability preparedness grant, the MVP grants. And they got I think the largest grant, like 2.1 million or something like that. And so now we were able to work with them to purchase and conserve the property, and they'll own it, but we're working with them now to develop a stewardship plan that makes sense for them and respects their tribal authority. And that's sort of ongoing right now.
Great. That's a really useful example. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
And this is Kathy, on a much smaller scale, the opposite end. We had a very small acreage that farmers had been using for hay for a long time, but as the equipment got larger and larger, it was less viable for them. And we had an immigrant locally who was also on SSI, so disability, who, being able to have a few acres to be able to do what she needed to do, it made sense. And the farmer was able to say, well, that's great, because we were just doing this for you because we didn't want you to not have the land being used, but it would be great for us to not have to spend our time doing this. So I think sometimes being able to make connections with smaller individuals, smaller operations, those who are doing different kinds of agriculture, there may be smaller pieces of land that agriculturally can be very important for them, which can facilitate good matches and be able to help out some of those in the EJ community.
I like that, and particularly like in the world of climate change and resiliency, like some of the uses of land will change over time, and so how do we best use the land and find the right type of agriculture for that piece in that particular situation? And I love how it was making the personal connection was so important. Thank you for sharing, Kathy. Jamie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Kathy's point of how important it is when we think about permanent protection of sort of increasing or, you know, changing our mindset a bit in terms of being more open and willing to protecting, you know, smaller farms that maybe historically we would have seen as, you know, more marginal or too tiny to be worthy of protection, and how critical that is. You know, the plan really uplifts the importance of access for a new generation of farmers. And so recognizing that a lot of these farmers are needing and wanting to be farming on smaller acreages or acreages closer to markets, or, you know, they're in need of infrastructure or housing to be tied to that farm. So I know this is all up in the plan, but just, you know, in practice, I think as we lean into this and are working on implementing the plan, as these projects come up for approval for APRs or other tools, you know, to really consider, you know, when we're thinking about the ranking and eligibility of some of these farms, how important it is when we tie it to this objective within the plan. And on the other side of that, you know, I think there has been, you know, something of a tradition when we're looking at APRs and at the time of deciding whether or not they are to be funded, you know, thinking about is there a successor lined up for the farm? And sometimes there isn't at the time of protection. And so just kind of inviting us to recognize that while there may not be a successor at the moment of that landowner being really wanting and willing to protect that farm, that it's still worthy of protection, and that to really kick it back to the local partners who know a lot of these farmers, who have relationships with these farmers, who can over time try to find that next successor. But to just invite us to not necessarily weed out farms that may not be seen as viable in that moment or have a successor in that moment, and looking at these other goals of the plan and, you know, buying us more time to protect that farm and then focus on the viability and the successors at the same time, but not have to do it as immediately or have that be sort of a disqualifying factor for protecting that farm.
Ditto.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add my voice to what Kathy and Jamie said. Absolutely agree with what they said.
Thank you. This is great. Any other thoughts? Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep moving, but we can always come back. Next steps. What I would say, I went through a lot really fast today, and what I'd say is go through the plan, reread the slides from today, have a look, read it in detail. How does this apply to me and my work? Am I really interested or not? You're not tied to what you told us today. In fact, I don't know who told me what. I just have an idea of roughly what percentage. So go through it a bit again and think about it. Think about how can we partner and collaborate more? How can we collaborate between land trusts to learn from each other and talk specifically about agriculture? I know you have a wide variety of things that come into your mission and what you do every day, but it would be good to have some intentional conversations focusing on the agricultural side of your work and encouraging others to step into that realm if they're maybe on the fence. It would be good to have more land trusts involved. Also, something to think about is how can we partner and collaborate more between MDAR staff and the department as a whole, and with land trusts. How can we collaborate and coordinate to bring about the best result for farmland across the state? We can work more and we can work more together, and let's see what we can do. what I'd say is I'll put my email address in the chat box, or maybe Dave and Jared could do, or Derek could do that. If you could email me if you're interested to get direct updates. Right now, I'm sending a mass email about once every month or two with updates on how the plan is going and things that are coming up. And I would love to have you directly get an email from me. That said, if you're signed up for this email, I believe you'll be going onto MLTC's Ag Interested group email list, so you'll probably also get notifications through there. But getting emails directly from me means you get it direct to your inbox. So just email me and I will be happy to add you to that list. Also, just know that today's conversation is just the start. We went through a lot of information, and a lot of these require a meeting or 5 or maybe even years worth of meetings to really delve into those details. And so what we're doing is doing that in the coming months. What we're doing with the plan is identifying lead implementers, people who are the champions or the energy behind it, and identifying potential other implementers. And what we've done is we've flagged land trust in a variety of areas, most of what we covered today, as potential other interested implementers. And so what we'll do is we'll have those discussions. We'll say, hey, we're about to talk about this, or we're going to dive into this. Are you interested? And we'll ask, we'll solicit people to come to the table at that point. If for each different initiative, there might be slightly different approaches to how we ask whether you want to get involved and how much involvement. But the main goal is that we do realize we need a broad variety of people at the table. We realize that land trusts have very different capacities, very different focuses, and very different specializations. And so we will need a broad range of land trusts involved to shape the best result. What I would also say is reach out to me if you have any questions. There's a lot today, but hopefully it's not too bad. So at this point, what I'm going to do is say, do you have any other questions or comments? We have 11 minutes until we're finished, and I would love to explore more some of the ideas that have already been discussed, and just to hear how you're feeling about it. Was this overwhelming, but I'm interested and want to step up more? Or was this like, no, you know what, this is not my cup of tea? Or do you have other ideas like Jamie and Amy and Kathy shared? So we have like 10 minutes, and I'm happy to keep going and see what you think. I have to admit, I have not been reading the chat box because I cannot read and talk at the same time. Rick, what do you think?
Yeah, hi, this is Rick Francolini. I am not a land trust person, so I did not participate. But I am an advocate. I'm on Cape Cod from the town of Orleans. We have a small regional operation underway. And I just wanted to let you know that municipalities slip through the cracks everywhere when it comes to resources, when it comes to funding. And now that municipalities are called out on that Farmland Action Plan, they're definitely an area I think that could use some focus, because to your earlier comment, there's all these different priorities in every town, and it's a hell of a lot easier to sell it into the decision makers if we have a little bit of help from the state. So for next time, but this was great, and I was really impressed with how the meeting was handled.
Thank you, Rick. Definitely, I would say if you could sign up for the newsletter, that would be great. Municipalities, I used to work for a small regional planning agency in Vermont, 10 towns, smallest town, 247. So I know what it means to be under-resourced. And so I hear what you're saying. So what we're going to do with municipalities is I'm trying to get a lot of like regional planning agencies and land trust involved, and I'm prepping towards moving into the municipal realm. We're not quite ready yet, but we're going to take time. And I think I'd love to have you involved as we move into that realm. So thank you for speaking up.
I'll be here when you're ready. I'm already on your list.
Thank you very much. Katharine.
Hi, I just wanted to say thanks for having the meeting, and I'm going to be reaching out to you individually. I volunteer with a land trust in Harvard, so it's just a town. Yep. But we have a lot of farmers who meet the profile of what you're talking about. One thing that we have that's a little specific here is we have old orchards. So we have an issue of remediating soils. We also don't have a ready pool of farmers to jump in. We have people who want to retire, and now we also need farmers. So we're trying to connect farms to farmers too. So there's a lot of things that like our land trust has to do and we have 2.5 part-time employees, and it's all volunteer-led. So, you know, it's a heavy lift, but it's really important because these, you know, farms are going to sell to developers soonish. And, you know, so there's a lot of work to do. I'm really excited. I hope that I can help and be part of it in some way.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. And yes, let's stay in touch. Anyone else?
Katharine, yeah, this is Jamie, and I guess I know we're sort of just living into this or figuring it out in real time, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts in terms of structure for like this particular group of people is such a brain trust and knowledgeable group, and I know there's like so many things that were said that I know I just really want to dig into and hear what the other land trusts across the state really think. What are your thoughts in terms of sort of next steps or follow-up conversations?
I would, my initial reaction is follow-up conversations will focus mostly going forward on particular topic areas. So as a task gets moving, an action or a task, we're starting to explore it, bring them together at that point. So that would require whoever's listed as a lead implementer. Lead implementers right now are primarily MDAR staff, but there are also some other groups, and some of them don't yet have a lead implementer identified. And I'd say once those get started, we'll bring Land Trust in at those points. Expressing your interest is really good. We now have a good idea from today's conversation. I know it was mainly by polls of where interests are lying, and we'll reach out in that way. Does that answer your question, or am I being too vague?
Well, I totally understand that it's kind of too big to wrap our arms around for all of it, but I know there is value, you know, to have a really diverse representative group from across the state for some of these. Like I'm just, for an example, thinking of the question that in the poll around, you know, strategically documenting and targeting and mapping farmland, right? Like that's such an important thing, and, you know, a charged thing that I know, you know, different land trusts may have different feelings or opinions about, or may have their own strategic plans. You know, that alone maybe would be like its own topic of conversation that like I'm really curious to hear what all the different partners here think about it, and how, you know, MDAR could play a role in terms of helping with that mapping, and how MDAR would, you know, work with some of the land trusts. So just that is one example among so many great ideas that were talked about today. So I'm just sort of curious about like structure and process and how we can really lean into, you know, the knowledge on this call.
Yeah, great. I think one of the things that I'm working towards, it'll be in the next month or two, is I am actually going to be sharing a progress report on where we're at today, kind of thing. And that will include some highlights of what we're already working on and what we're celebrating, what's already moving in a certain direction. But what I'm also hoping to include in that is a list of some options of what we might move into next. And not we being the collective, all partners across the state, and getting people's level of interest of this is super important to me. Now, I've done these kind of prioritizations before, and it doesn't always mean the person, like if the most number of people, if everyone says, I love it and I want it, sometimes there's a reason why we can't move it forward. But sometimes what we're looking for is that second priority, where a lot of people, we don't have the division between I really need it and I really don't care about it. What we want is a lot of people to say, I care enough about it that I want it to move. And so what I want to do over the coming months, once trying to get a few things together, but I would like to actually talk to a variety of partners, including Land Trust, to assess like how important are various items and how do we juggle what we could potentially do. We all have capacity issues, so we can't have every conversation at the same time. So which conversations do we have is what I would like help to decide, with the help of everyone in this room and others. So hopefully that helps.
I have more questions, but I think Dave has his hand up, and then maybe Thomas.
Okay. Yeah. David,
yeah, just to sort of add to what Katharine was saying to your question, Jamie, you know, some of the things that stand out to me from today's discussion, you know, Katharine's obviously working hard to make the rounds, to talk to everybody, to find out not only what they're interested and able to do, but who can potentially be the energy to help drive one thing or another. And to that end, I just want to reiterate this plan, this Farmland Action Plan for the state, it's not an MDAR plan. right? MDAR cannot do everything. We need all of our partners to step in the ways that they want to and can. And, MDAR will certainly, try to do as much as we can to build capacity and help. But Katharine had asked everybody to take a look at the Farmland Action Plan, and I'm going to ask again, take the time, look at the Farmland Action Plan, see how you can plug it into your day-to-day operations, see how you can grow your day-to-day operations to enhance the Farmland Action Plan implementation. The onus is on all of us. And every little bit, whether it's a big contribution or minor, is key. And some of the things have been identified, like participating in the state NRCS state technical committee, right? Like that's a potential area that a land trust or even a municipality could step up and do, as well as the Mass Land Trust Coalition has an agricultural subcommittee, which, is active and could potentially, consider taking on some of these actions. So it's a combination of, there are some pretty clear areas where people can plug in immediately. We're also trying to figure out where other areas people can plug in, and then people just need to figure it out on their own as well, right? Sort of like that. At least that's my own personal perspective.
Thank you, Dave. Thomas, you may have the last comment because you've got 1 minute to go. You're muted.
I'm with Medicom at Land Trust. And I'm also with NOFA, which is New England Organic Farming Association. I don't know if you ever reached out to them yet, but they could be a big player in here. They, Medicom is a small land trust. We're only in 15 towns, but NOFA is all New England. They have branches in every state. So at least the state agency of Massachusetts of NOFA would be probably very interested in input for this. And, I appreciate what you're doing. This is very informative, and I'd like to be on your mailing list.
Great. It's good to know your interest. And with NOFA, I have not spoken to them yet. I'm pretty sure other members of my staff at various points over the last few years. But if you have a contact in specific who I should reach out to, let me know. And definitely NOFA is on the radar, and so I will reach out. So
We're currently working with 2 farms now to continue their farming operations, but I can't really talk more about that at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, it's 1:30. So I don't know if Rob has anything to add to close this out, but otherwise, I would like to say thank you. This was a great conversation. I know it was a lot of polls, but hopefully this is a good start to the conversation, and I look forward to working with you all. Rob, do you have anything to add?
Nothing to add. I just really want to thank you, Katharine, for running a highly interactive discussion. And I think it was a great introduction to the plan. So we do plan to add those of you who signed up to the agricultural interest list of the Mass Land Trust Coalition, which sends occasional emails of relevance on next steps. And a recording as well as the slides will be sent to everybody who registered for today. So looking forward to doing that soon. Thanks.
Great. Thank you all.